let me just 1 second. Let me just get this pulled up, and we'll get going. So this is part two of this week's stuff. We're going to be looking at some maps and identifying. Remember from last week our landforms. So Mr. Dre has been rereading his favorite book, and it's a fantasy book, so it's not an actual place, but this is a made-up world called Middle Earth, and this is one of the maps that they gave in the book. The guy who wrote the book, he drew entire maps of his whole world. He wrote legends and histories and all this cool stuff. So we're gonna take a look at one of these. So if we remember from last week, we had our landforms. I'm going to identify the major landforms in this map real quick. This one is very basic. I mean, we have one big, it's labeled even, the Lonely Mountain right here. It looks like a big old mountain with a lot of little things running off of it, maybe canyons or hills or something. Then we have this is one of the cities in the book. You see it's like a little city down here in the bend of the river. So this is a river right here, the running river. And then we had the city here of Dale. It was destroyed by a dragon who's right here. The dragon came in and took over the mountain. And just the rest of this, we have over here the Forest River. This is the major river of the area. And west lies Mirkwood the Great. There are spiders. In the book, they are attacked by giant spiders in Mirkwood. And so there's all these this is obviously from a fantasy, so it's made up. I mean, there's dragons and giant spiders, so it's not true. And then even over here, so the author invented his own language, so this is not in English, but this would be our compass right here. So I'm guessing this is actually north. This way, this map is also sideways. So we're going to look at another map from the same book. This map is of the larger area. So over here, if we look, we see the Lonely Mountain. Smaug, the dragon, is right here. And then we have our river, the river running. So I put a little square here. This shows us where the last map was. So from looking at this, there's a lot more landforms listed. We've got the Gray Mountains over here. We've got the Misty Mountains, the Great River, all these different, the Forest River right here. This was on the last map. So if we look here, we'll see some hills. These are some hills out in the woods. These old maps, they depicted things. They put pictures of things in them. Modern maps don't really do that so much, but back in the day, we didn't really have as fancy ways to make stuff. So back then there was a lot of art in it. So these, mountains over here are drawn in. Nowadays they would be depicted in a different way, which we'll go over a little later. But still remember, all of these labels are important. And so we're going to move on. We're going to look at another. This is a real map, but it's still ancient. It's old. This is a map of ancient and modern Israel. There are some really good maps of ancient Israel and some very good maps of modern Israel too. So I figured this would be a good way for us to look at different ways of depicting things. So now, if you'll notice, this is the ancient map. It's very basic. Everything it's the different kingdoms are labeled. You have Nazareth is one of the cities, Galilee, all of these, if you recognize, these are all from the Bible. Jerusalem, Moab, Israel, Judea, all of these different areas are labeled, but the lines are kind of iffy, and back then they didn't have satellites to help them map stuff, so they had to do their best guesses. And then if we look over here, though, our modern map is a lot more detailed. So we have the West Bank over here. This is Gaza. We have Israel down here. If we look, the borders of Israel have changed drastically. Israel used to just be this little green area right here. And this area up here, kind of. And nowadays, Israel, so they have this whole north part still. And then you come over, it looks like they've lost this area in the middle of the West Bank. And then down towards the south, we still have the southern area, but then actually they got a whole extra area down here. This was during a war, the 7 Day War, after they founded Israel. There was a war, and Israel took over a lot of land down here. So, and then over here we have some other nations. We have Jordan, we have Egypt, we have some other landforms listed right here, like the Dead Sea. We have the Jordan River. We have a couple of other rivers, lakes. This is the Mediterranean Sea over here. If we're looking at our maps, usually if it's blue, it's going to be water. So we will look at this is a more modern map. This is something that was made with satellites. This is actually directly from Google Maps. So this is Baltimore right here. We have we'll go down the list. So the green and white areas are going to be land. Usually on a Google map, the green areas are parks, and then just the white is regular land. The blue is the water. So this is the Chesapeake Bay out here. This is the Patapsco River. This is the, Back River. So between these two rivers is this whole area, Dundalk, Sparrows Point, up into, this is the Inner Harbor right here. We see these lines all over the place. These are all roads. The different roads have different colors. So for example, there's interstates are going to be in yellow. The white roads are just going to be regular streets. The labels tell us where we're located. So we know from reading this label over here that we're looking at a map of Baltimore. We know that we might be looking at Dundalk right here. We know that this area is going to be called Hart Miller Island. And the scale is the last thing. It will give us references for distances. So in Google Maps, it's down in the bottom right. That'll be important. Remember that. And this one, it says, so this area from this end to this end is 2 miles. And on a normal map, you would use a ruler, and you could figure out how far on the ruler equaled that distance, and then you could put it on the map, and you could count how many distances between two places, and you could figure out a rough distance. It's not very accurate. So it's really nice now. We can just use satellites, and the satellites will just tell us exactly how far apart things are. Modern science has made maps much easier to make. So elevation is going to be how high something is. So when we're talking about elevation, we're going to be usually talking about mountains or hills or something higher than 0. So remember, we're talking about our coordinate plane, so we have to have our 0. Our 0 is going to be this point right here at the flat where the ocean lies. It's called sea level. We'll go into a little bit more detail about that right about now. So think about if you pour out a bunch of water onto a surface, what does it do? It's going to spread out. Water likes to spread out. Water likes to sit flat on the surface. So this actually applies to the entire oceans as well. So not just if you spill your water on the floor, but if you take the trillion gallons that are in an ocean and you just poured it all in there, it would flatten out eventually. So we use this as the 0 point for measuring elevations. So think about that. That's like the middle of your coordinate plane is going to be sea level and then wherever you're looking at. So this is a little diagram showing how we figure out sea level. I don't know if we have time to learn about all this, but there's tides. So basically the water will have a high point and a low point throughout the day, and it'll go up and down between them. And then you can add this other surge. So there's a bunch of different things that change the level of the water. But when we calculate sea level, it's what's called the mean. So it's that value in the middle. It's going to be between high tide and low tide. Somewhere in the middle, that'll be where sea level is. So this house would be elevated, I don't know, there's no scale, but, let's say 100 feet above sea level, something like that. We could figure that out with rulers, satellites, any number of things. So this is our next word. Topology it represents 3D surfaces on a 2D. So if we look here on our title, I see we have a topographic profile of a shield volcano. So all that means, big fancy words, saying that we have a or a two-dimensional representation of a volcano. So if we look around the bottom, this is going to be our zero. So we're not using sea level here, we're using the bottom of the mountain. And then each one of these lines represents 1,000 feet. So from here to here, we would go up 1,000 feet. From here to here, we would go up 1,000 feet again. From here to here, we would go up another 1,000 and another and another and another until we get to the top, which looks to be 13,000 feet tall. So that's the biggest number I see here. So I'm going to assume that's the top. So it looks like over here, there's another peak as well. So it looks like we have two peaks here, because if we look at our lines, we're going up. So these also, the distance between them shows the steepness of the slope. So over here, it would not be very steep. You might be able to walk up this. But over here, this looks very steep because these lines are closer together. Remember, everyone, we're going up 1,000 feet. So if they're real close together, if they're right on top of each other, you might be looking at a cliff. If they are like this, then you're looking at a very, very steep mountain. Over here, this might just be sticking mostly straight up. It might be, I don't know for sure, but I can make guesses from looking at the lines on here. So this is going to be a helpful way. When I used to do Boy Scouts, we would use these to figure out what part of the mountain should we go up. Shouldn't, if we see lines like this, unless we brought climbing gear, we knew not to go up that way. We would look around and we would be like, okay, so looks like over here it's not very steep, so maybe we can try hiking up this side. Stuff like that. So we're going to look at a couple, actually, we're going to wrap this up here and we'll come back to this stuff.